Hi all, Richard here. A quick note to our listeners and viewers. I had a microphone issue in this episode. We couldn't fully fix it, but the content was too good not to share. Thanks for understanding. Well, hi everybody. Did you know that many Gen Xers are freaking out about retirement? That's what the authors Kerry Hannon and Jana Heron say in their new book, Retirement Bites, a Gen X guide to securing your financial future. Well, it's easy to see why. The oldest Gen Xers are turning 60 this year. The youngest ones are 45. So this is a generation that's inching up to retirement. But why are so many freaking out about it? So for answers, we've got Kerry Hannon today, one of the authors of the book. Hi, Kerry. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
You bet. So I know that my friends Terry Savage and Pam Krueger have a whole lot of questions for you. I do too. But I'm going to start by asking just a very basic question. Why are so many Gen Xers so worried about retirement? I read one study that said that 56% of Gen Xers think it's likely they could outlive their money, and 54% don't think they'll be financially prepared for retirement when the time comes. So what is going on?
Yeah, I think Richard, I mean, this is a huge issue for this generation that it kind of this stage of life that we call retirement is now coming into view in the windshield and the numbers are starting to look real. And in fact, many of them, like 1 in 4, don't even have a retirement account. So we've got to take a look at this and say, all right, why the angst? Well, they have good reason for that. And part of this really goes back in history. When Gen X first started into the workplace, the 401k was just getting started. And this idea of do-it-yourself retirement was slowly seeping into the culture, but nobody told us how to do it. Nobody told us what this meant or what choices to make. And seriously, there weren't that many choices in these plans for you to pick from, nor did you have the ability to put much aside at that point. There wasn't a huge amount of money you could put into these. But the real basic point was a lack of financial education. No one understood this. There's a lot of cashing out. So the baby, when you look at the numbers, the generations, the studies show that Gen X started retirement saving at around the average one, around 31. Whereas if you look at millennials, it's 24. So this is huge. So I think this is the lack of understanding do-it-yourself retirement and as pensions faded away is the number one reason why there is financial insecurity for this group.
I know you talked to a bunch of experts for the book. You talked to Gen Xers for the book. When do Gen Xers think that they're going to retire? Do they think they're going to retire? And how do they even define retirement these days? I saw another study that found 48% of Gen Xers say they expect to keep working during retirement, and 25% say they won't keep working, but 27% aren't sure. So what are you hearing?
Well, I just hope they keep working. I think, but I'm a big fan of work. I mean, I think work is not a 4-letter word. I think this is like the solution if they can keep some traction in the workplace because, yes, I do think many of the Gen Xers I've talked to, work is becoming part of their retirement plan. So it's not retirement in that old-fashioned scenario we all grew up with, like, hey, I'm just going to quit work at 65 and off I go to do what have you. No. This group is talking about phasing into retirement, slowly moving into this. And truthfully, all the financial experts, we got a couple right here on this podcast, can tell you that it's super important. If you can extend your working life even by a couple of years, that can make a huge difference in how much they can sock away for retirement. So this isn't full blown in front of their eyes right now, but I'm hearing it. And I think this is what is going to be what will play out for this generation and hopefully for generations to come in a way.
Oh, wait a second. I have to interrupt here. We just did some podcasts maybe 2 years ago. There was that whole quiet quitting. Wasn't that this generation? And how about the FIRE movement? I'm going to retire, at 40 or something like that. That's partly this generation was talking about that stuff. Has there been some major thing that has slapped Gen Xers in the face where they've gone, excuse me, this is really pretty scary. What have I done and what haven't I done?
Well, Kerry, I think that's a great question. And I think, yes, Gen X, but also millennials were a big part of that. People often forget who Gen X is. They go boomers to millennials. So I think a lot of millennials were doing
I
that
agree.
quiet quitting. But I do think that there has been sort of this awareness. And I got to say that the economy, in terms of rising costs and inflation, really has given people a bit of a wake-up call about what they might need in order to have a time where they've stepped out of the workplace. And all the news about longevity, we hear it over and over again. You're going to have 2 decades, 3 decades to finance.
Yeah, what, to do nothing?
Yeah, exactly. To A, do nothing, and B, how do you support that financially? How can you possibly even calculate what that might be? So I do think that you're correct, that there's the shifting tides, but I think there's a clear focus coming in to view for this generation as they near retirement. And really the best time to start thinking about this period in your life is 10 years before you're going to do it. So this is really the time for them to say, okay, I got to get this together.
Yeah. Kerry, also, you've written a lot about, people in that age group in debt, and we're going to touch on that. But what came to my mind that I want to try to figure out right now is, looking at what is Gen X still dealing with at this age. Like Terry said, you had the extreme, we're going to retire at 50 or younger, or, the other extreme, we can't ever retire. They're juggling still kids who might be still living at home, maybe even in college, in this generation. They've got potential for aging parents who may need some caregiving, which is time and money. They've got their own retirement planning. It strains, the cash flows. It really stresses out the Gen Xer, maybe in ways that the boomer didn't quite experience as sharply. But Kerry, it's something I've been seeing every day at Wealth Ramp, especially with Gen X, because there isn't a day that goes by, and I'm not kidding, even on weekends, a day does not go by that I don't talk to one of these people, and especially listening to the lifelong DIYer, the person who says, Pam, I've done a great job of managing my own portfolio for all these years, accumulating wealth. And they're hitting a point where the complexity catches up, whether it's the aging parents, all the job pivots they've had, might be uncertainty in a day when we see the market drop, substantially in one day. They're looking for fresh eyes, and they do want some help. But my question to you is, one study shows that Gen Xers said that only something like, the study says 27% of Gen Xers are actually engaging with a financial advisor to get any help. Why do you think the number is so low when Gen Xers are telling us about all the complexity and all the help they feel like they need going into the future, even if they've been do-it-yourselfers?
Yeah, that's right, Pam. I think it's true that it is sort of a generation that has so many competing priorities. We've got those parents, we've got the kids, and lots of shifting priorities here. Many, if you're at the younger end, have kids that are just applying to colleges now or thinking about it. So it's really important. Here it is. I think, and the people I've talked, this is a super scrappy generation. This is a generation of, they were the latchkey kids. They rode bikes without helmets. They drank water from the hose. Nobody told them not to do things like this. They ate Pop-Tarts. They made their own meals, and they raged against the machine. They don't want anyone telling them what to do. They know how to do it themselves. This is the ethos of this generation, and it's kind of cool. It's resilient, and we love that. I love that about the spirit of this generation, because that's why I think they can bounce back from being a little behind right now in retirement savings. But in the book, I talk quite a bit about the importance of saying, okay, great, we know that you've been really great at juggling a lot of these things all by yourself. You don't need any help. You're quite confident on your own. But I hear it just like you're telling me. And so in the book, we spend a bit of time saying, okay, this is the time to get somebody to go up on that balcony and look down at everything you have. Because we started this conversation talking about retirement accounts, but there's so much more to what your assets are, what you have in a total wealth picture, that only a financial advisor can really see all the moving pieces for you, because it's hard to do it by yourself. So you might be managing those investments, but do you understand how your real estate fits into that, or a future inheritance might, or what have you? So I think we're starting to see people realizing that. And also, Pam, it's a lot more accessible to find a really good financial advisor that is fee only or what have you today, than it used to be.
Pam Krueger has made it 100% accessible, because she created
That's right. That's right.
where she spends her life connecting
Yeah.
people in this situation, older and younger, with fee-only fiduciary advisors that she has carefully vetted.
Okay.
That's the great thing about what Pam is doing. And the question is whether this generation of do-it-yourselfers is confusing what the point you just made, which is really important. The difference between how do I invest, which funds do I use in my 401k, or what if I have some other investments, with what's the holistic picture of the plan? Where will I have income in retirement? All kinds of things, long-term care insurance. Where am I going to live? And most importantly, I think, is, am I going to take on debt for my kids at this stage? They're the ones that are just going to college. Am I co-signing parent loans? I hope you'll talk about that, because my big thing is that you can go to the state university or the local college and get a great education. And in the age of AI, nobody's going to really care that much. And that the burden of debt is just going to be overwhelming to the parents that are, in their 40s now, who have kids that are 19, 20, 21.
This generation has the highest level of student loans of any generation, debt, as well as credit card debt. And a lot of it is the cost of education rose tremendously during their time, as well as, my goodness, if you remember, when you're getting started at that age, at least in my case, you could get credit cards no matter how much money you made. You didn't have to make much of anything. You could, there are opportunities to get credit. And so it became part of something that this generation learned how to manipulate, borrowing on credit cards, essentially. And they've run up credit card debt that is among the highest of any generation. So they're really grappling with some of these debt issues, even before they start thinking about, am I saving enough for retirement? In fact, many of them, the average Gen Xer is only saving around 10% of their income for retirement versus 20% for the Gen Z generation. So I think that, they're not saving as much, but I am hopeful, because I do think that they have a lot of opportunities to really take control of this.
So is your book meant to be a description or a prescription for Gen Xers? How do you approach this whole retirement bites thing?
That's right. It's a playbook. I mean, we set the stage. We talked to lots of Gen Xers about everything from their favorite bands to their favorite investments, and got a sense of how they feel about it. So we set the cultural stage for it, and then we say, okay, let's break it down. How can we pull this apart to create a successful financial future for yourself, no matter what it is, whether you're continuing to work longer, where you might want to live, if you want to, even start your own business, whatever it might be in this next phase of life as you near this. But you're correct that we really offer it up as, here's some resources, here's how to take control.
One of the things I thought was very interesting in Retirement Bites, Kerry, was you talk about Gen X as being not just really one generation. You're talking, there's older Gen Xers and the younger Gen Xers.
Yeah.
The older ones are closer to 60. They're born in the late 60s, early 70s. The younger ones, they're in their late 40s, early 50s, born in the late 1970s. I wonder if you could talk about how their financial lives have been different, and how's that affecting how they're feeling about retirement these days?
Yeah, I think the older Gen Xers have they faced a little more of the headwinds from the Great Recession, those sorts of things, the tech boom and bust. And so they have faced some of those headwinds. The younger Gen Xers have the possibility, and I say that word carefully, it's possibly, that they will inherit a wealth transfer from their boomer parents. It's possible. So they have that to consider. The younger Gen Xers I interviewed for the book, and I've worked with, they don't even think Social Security, and we can talk in a bit more about that. They don't even plan for it. They've never even expected it would be something that they're going to actually get what they've paid into at this point. There's sort of this real skepticism about it. The older Gen Xers still included as part of their plan, and they're expecting that. So I think you do see a different take from those perspectives, and there's certainly more as we pull it apart.
And what did you learn about Gen Xers as investors? How do they invest, and are they any different than boomers are?
I don't think they're much different at all, because often, particularly if you're doing it through a retirement plan that your employer offers. And again, you all have talked about this a lot in your show. Only about 50% of Americans actually have access to one of these employer provided plans. But if you do, then again, then they tend to go with, right now in particular, you all know the hottest thing is the target date fund. And I think we're seeing that across the board with Gen Xers, and it's become sort of almost the default in many of retirement plans for a lot of the generations, but certainly this one. And I think ultimately that's a good thing.
Kerry, one thing I've seen that I just love to know if you see it yourself and agree with it. But the one thing that I see that is my big message, especially to Gen X, is you don't have to, if you are looking for help, you don't have to sign over the keys to the castle. I think the Gen Xers are do-it-yourselfers, and when they come to me, and I just want to know if you find the same thing, they only want scope of work. They may only want, hey, all I want is just to have an evaluation. I want someone to help me do a deep dive. I don't want a relationship ongoing, or they might want a relationship ongoing, but they don't want their portfolio managed. So I think that they're different in their consumption of what they are looking for when they look for help, and they're demanding, and they're not going to settle for somebody who says you have to do it my way. If you are going to get advice from an advisor, you're going to do it my way or the highway, and they are driving change.
I think, Pam, you're so on the ground on this. That is exactly, you summed it up beautifully there. I think that what you are witnessing right there working with Gen X clients is exactly what's happening. And I find myself, I do that. Like, I like working with a financial advisor for certain things, but I still like having my own accounts that I manage, do it yourself over on the side. I want them to look at it maybe overall to make sure my balance isn't out of whack. But so you hand over a little piece of it, but not the whole thing. I mean, there's a sense of wanting to stay in control. And I think that's part of the ethos. And as long as you know where everything is, now, again, I think we mentioned too, that a lot of this generation at this point, they may have gone through a couple of job changes, and like, do we know, have we rolled over those accounts? If someone can help you kind of consolidate or put things in one place just to make it a bit simpler, I think is really useful for Gen X. And I think that's probably, you hear that a lot as well.
Kerry?
And this is, as you've described this generation, how do you get the message out? What you were talking about doing a little bit of this or that and having some control. There's a commercial, and for the life of me, I've seen it a lot, but I can't remember which financial services firm. But there's an old guy riding in the back of the limousine with a younger business executive. And she says, no, I don't have to hand over everything. And I wonder how, I mean, your book is a great starting point for that generation. But how do you get this generation to wake up to all these things that are right now? I'm too busy to think about it. I'm too in debt to think about it. I have too many issues, my parents and my kids, to think about it. Who sounds the wake-up call for this?
Yeah, that's a good one, but I hope our book does, because here's the thing, is no other book has addressed this generation in terms of retirement. And here's the cool thing, Terry and Pam and Rich, is that this generation is at their peak earning years. I mean, this is a great time for them to all of us to wake up, because they do have time, they do have resources now, that they can make a change, they can change course. It's going to take finagling, it's going to take some work on their part, it's going to be budgeting. A lot of things that have happened, and you all probably have had this in your own lives, is you have lifestyle creep. I mean, you might have done a budget back when you were getting started, or if you started a family, whatever it might be, but at a certain point, your lifestyle just it creeps up and you don't even know how to manage.
Absolutely.
So this is the time to take control. And if you can just, and Pam, you probably work with folks, if you can just get them to actually do a budget, for gosh sakes. It sounds like
You
eye
know,
rolling, but
by the time people come to me, it's because the wake up call, they already had the alarm bell go off.
yeah.
They're calling and they're reaching out because they're like, I kind of woke up this morning and kind of realized what I don't know, and that I've got some blind spots. But that's what I love about Gen X. They want it, they know they want it their way, and they know what they want. So generally speaking, if they haven't gotten to that wake up call themselves yet, I don't really see them until they're at the point where they're like, I definitely need some help.
Yeah, I mean, if we could get Eddie Vedder to talk about it at a Pearl Jam concert, I think you
Why
get
not?
people to do this.
Why not?
But they also have a lot of home equity. I mean, they have a lot of house equity in their real estate. And this
Yeah.
is a real plus for this generation because yes, I mean, housing prices, shift around a bit, but in general, they've amassed a fair amount in this asset that they can use moving forward. And some may even have a second home at this point that they could use for a resource for income down the road.
Yeah, that's a very specific and individual, decision. But Kerry, can we go back to Social Security for a second? Because it kind of sticks with me that the study by Allianz Life found that 70% of Gen Xers really worry that Social Security will not be available to them when they retire. Can you just talk for a minute about a little bit more about Social Security, kind of, and what you write about with regard to answering that concern?
Yeah, I mean, I believe that they will have Social Security. I think it's possible it might be reduced slightly, but I do think something will happen. Washington's a mess, of course, but something I do honestly believe something will happen. But the financial advisors, and I think you might agree on this. If you don't, please shout out. Do try to run the numbers for folks this generation, especially the younger ones, as if it's not going to be part of their overall
Right, to give them a
retirement.
peace of mind that
Yeah.
this is what life would look like if everything went to hell in a handbasket as far as
Yeah,
Social
but I have heard a lot of advisors say that they believe that when Congress and whoever president is at the time decide to do something about solvency for Social Security, that the first generation that's going to feel it in some way will be Gen X. The boomers probably won't because they will already have been retired. The Gen Xers are just getting close to that, and they're the ones that are going to feel the pinch, at least the first part.
Well, please do me a favor and don't tell them, because we really need them and all the younger generations to keep working and making that huge.
Yeah, just keep working.
FICA contribution,
Yeah.
which their employers match with a contribution to the check that I will get next month. I think Social Security, for many years, I mean, I'm going back 40 years, a line from my speech was, I'm not terribly sure that Social Security will contribute anything meaningful to my retirement. This is why I'm showing you how to save in your retirement plans and so forth. That was always been my thesis. I don't think we have a huge percentage of the population that exists solely by virtue of their Social Security checks. And maybe that will continue. We have a needs-based assessment of Social Security. I think the critical distinction is to plan around that. And time is short when you're in your 50s, but life is long these days when you're in your 50s. And it's a balancing act. Now, one thing that's going to come into this balancing act, which everybody's sort of aware of because of the headlines, man, we've shut down the government over the question of how are we going to pay for healthcare? What's it going to cost? Who's going to contribute? We haven't shut down Social Security yet, and clearly the trust fund is actuarially insolvent within our lifetimes. But healthcare is now a key thing, and I think the gap between when you may lose your job or you may need to provide insurance for a spouse if you're not covered and so forth, but you get Medicare, is got to be the biggest worrying point. I know you addressed that, Kerry.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad you brought that up because when people, when this generation asks, what is one thing I can really do to help my financial security as I age? It is right now, take a look at your health. Because, you've heard this a million times, the whole tagline, health is wealth. And that's the thing. I mean, healthcare, what's the Fidelity number that comes out that it's like, $400,000 or something out of pocket, that even if you're on Medicare for the rest of your life. And so the fact is, if you can look at your life right now, you're a Gen Xer, you're, 40s and 50s, and what can you do? Do you have hypertension? Should you be are you paying attention to what you're eating? Are you exercising? It sounds like, okay, this isn't financial advice. Yeah, it is. Because what you just said is that health cost is really, and this is aside from, can you get health insurance? This is just in general. If you can take control of and live the best you can today to prepare to not have some of these onerous costs. You can't control everything, but you certainly can take a stab at it.
Good point.
Kerry, you mentioned a couple of times this being the prime earning years for Gen X, but I'm worried that some of them aren't going to be able to keep those jobs as much as they want to work. We're seeing layoffs already. And as you know, age discrimination starts in people's 40s and certainly into their 50s these days. So I'm wondering, what's your advice for people in Gen X who are either out of work or nervous that they might be? Is it about starting their own business, or do you have advice for them about finding a job at that age? What would you tell people?
That's one of my favorite subjects. So I think the best thing you can be doing, particularly if you're still employed at the moment, is, are you keeping your skills up to date? Are you aware of staying right apace with the changes in your industry? Yeah, you could lose your job, but if you're not prepared with current skills to step back into another position, and open-minded enough to say, I'm going to give this a try. It's not exactly in my wheelhouse, but I think I'm going to be able to do this, and go for it. Or, people get very complacent, and particularly as we get pretty set in our careers, that happens. But in today's age, things are changing far too quickly.
Yeah, you're right. And younger people have to do that all the time. People in their 30s have to live and die by being flexible and being able to do that. And we lose that as we age. We just get very in our little boxes.
Yeah. So it's your skills, it's your network.
Yeah.
Stay in touch, build out that LinkedIn thing. Who do you know that's doing cool work that you'd like to do? Or a company that really has something, they make a product or they have a service that is meaningful to you. Where do you want to work? But Rich, it's taking control before things happen. If you've already lost your job, these things don't hurt at all either.
Yeah.
Sure.
My whole mantra, I'm so glad you said that, about what you can control and what you can't control. I almost do that in my own life on just a constant basis. What can I control and what can't I control in terms of, the economy changes, stock market drops, and health and so forth. And some of it is squishy. Some of it I might be able to only partially have any control over. But, just kind of being mindful about that I think, drives a lot of successful outcomes, because you're not caught by surprise as much when things change.
Yep. I think being intentional and mindful of that the world is ever changing at a rate that many of us haven't experienced before, but there's no reason you can't be a part of that. And a lot of it is just not getting stuck in a moment, as Bono sings about.
I'll leave it with one thought. A lot of our audience is baby boomers, on behalf of them, and who have children in this bracket now. What's the advice to the parents of this generation that you might give? I know as boomers, we think we had it tough. We didn't. We really have had the road paved for us. When we started school, they built schools and so on and so forth. We went to college without, for the most part, great debt. We have no idea how our kids are dealing with their own debt, much less our grandchildren's debt. So it's from a perspective of a baby boomer parent of this generation, what advice do you have for the parents? That's a big hunk of our audience.
I think, Terry, the important thing that a parent can do for a child is to lead by example. And what they have been doing in their own financial lives, in their own working lives really serve as great examples for what their kids can emulate and what they might work for. And it needs to also to make the conversations about money transparent, to really work hard to talk to your kids about your finances, their finances.
Bingo.
I mean, I think that's opening that door. That was something when I was growing up, we really didn't talk about. We talked about business, work, but we didn't really get into under the covers of my parents' finances in a way that I think can be useful to say, hey, I made these mistakes, or if you feel like getting that open with your children, or I'm
Yeah.
really proud of what I did here. And I think if you can counsel them to stay away from debt, by all means. I loved your example about education, really rethinking that price tag for that sort of thing. And there are ways to try to also, and this is a big theme in a lot of our work these days, is intergenerational things. So at their age, they should also still be looking to what they can learn from the different generations in terms of managing their money, because and women in particular tend to, really shut down on this issue. And you both, or at least all of you know this, I'm sure, from your work. And so anything we can do to open that door and give that financial confidence. But I think leading by example is probably the best thing a parent can do.
Yeah. Talking with your kids who are let's say you've got younger Gen X kids, and if you're the parent who brings it up, oh my gosh, how much less stress is that than waiting for your Gen X child to bring it up to you, because they don't want to bring it up. The adult children of aging parents don't want to bring up the topic about mom or dad's money. They're hoping you will do it.
And they're worried. That's my latest column. The talk that's the most difficult is not the birds and the bees anymore. It's the bills and the wills. The bills and the wills.
One thing I'll just finish by saying is that in terms of advice for boomer parents, I would say one thing you might want to be sure you do is not force your Gen X kids to take your stuff, because they don't want it. And a lot of Gen Xers are
Except if
getting
it's
really
money.
annoyed. They're getting
Richard,
very
except
annoyed.
if it's money. They'll
They'll
take
take your
We
money.
did
not
a
your
whole
dining room.
podcast on your parents, nobody wants your parents' stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Kerry, thank you so much for joining us today. Best of success with Retirement Bites. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today on Friends Talk Money.
Good to see
Thanks,
you,
Ron.
Kerry. Thanks.
Friends Talk Money is funded in part by a grant from the Investor Protection Trust. The IPT is a nonprofit organization devoted to investor education. Since 1993, the IPT has worked with the states to provide the independent, objective investor education needed by all Americans to make informed investment decisions. Visit investorprotection.org. We also receive support from the North American Securities Administrators Association, known as NASA. It's the oldest international investor protection organization. NASA's members include state and provincial securities regulators from the U.S., Canada, and Mexico who serve on the front lines of investor protection. Recognizing that education and awareness are powerful tools in the fight against investment fraud, NASA is pleased to sponsor Friends Talk Money. Here are 3 important tips to help you protect your money from fraud. With investing, there are always risks, so be cautious of anybody telling you that a certain investment is guaranteed. You should also proceed with caution if somebody is promising very large investment returns. This is a common red flag for investment fraud. Last and most importantly, be sure you're working with a licensed or registered financial professional. You can check your advisor and make sure they're licensed by visiting brokercheck.finra.org.